Of all the people in your life, is there one person that you love the most? And perhaps this is a difficult question because generally we have more than one person that we really love from our hearts. And these people that you love, what could you do for them? Are there any limits to who you can be for them or what you can do for them? Are there words that can describe how much you love them? And I ask you these questions because today we are going to reflect on how much Jesus loves us. Who is He for us? What does He become for us? What does He give us? Are there any limits to how much Jesus loves us? Friends, we have been reflecting on the Bread of Life discourse from the Gospel of John, and we began this last weekend. And we began that reflection with these words, "I am the bread of life," Jesus said. "Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst." This weekend, Jesus takes us one step forward in this Bread of Life discourse. He says, "The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world." Folks, this one word flesh, this one single word flesh describes how much Jesus loves us and loves the world. The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world. These words, they epitomize Jesus' ultimate self-giving. In other words, this is the full extent of what somebody can do for another person. The offering of their total, complete, unconditional self to the other person. Now, many people say that Jesus' giving of Himself in the Gospel of John is some kind of a symbolic gesture. And actually, it's not. And we know this because of the language that John uses. See, John uses the word sarx, the Greek word sarx, S-A-R-X, when he uses the word flesh. And it literally means the outer covering to the human bone, the actual flesh, literally the flesh. Now, in a broader sense, it could also mean the human person and human nature. But sarx is literally used of flesh. Now, there is another language, another word that John uses that also tells us that John was not merely playing with words. And the word is the Greek word trogian. See, in the Gospel of John, when it refers to the act of eating, there are other words that are also used. But only here in this passage, John also uses the word trogian. And it actually refers to the act of eating, the literal act of eating. It involves a munching. It involves a crunching. And so this takes us to the Last Supper, right? When Jesus took bread and He gave it to His disciples and He said, "This is my body." And then He took the cup and He gave it to His disciples and He said, "This is my blood." And He said to them, "Eat and drink." And this was not just some mere verbal assurance. It was not mere words. After the Last Supper, Jesus gave His body and He shed His blood. In other words, He actually gave His entire self, body, soul, divinity, to us and for the life of the world. So in the Eucharist, we have access to Jesus and His flesh and blood. I earlier asked you the question, what would you do for the ones that you love? If you had to ask Jesus that question, Jesus would say, "The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world." Basically, he's saying that from now and until eternity, Jesus has given us his complete self, body, soul, divinity, for our life and the life of the world. And then, of course, he says to his disciples at the Last Supper, do this in memory of me. Now, just this last part of this reflection, I want to talk about what does Jesus mean by do this? What's the this in do this in memory of me? From on a very narrow meaning, it really literally means to the Last Supper, or the actual Eucharist that we celebrate, the Mass that we celebrate. But if you really want to think like Jesus, we have to look at it a little more broadly. See, the Last Supper and Jesus' death on the cross, they were actually merely the culmination, the highest point of his entire life that was dedicated to self-giving. From the womb to the tomb, from the moment of his conception till he died on the cross, all Jesus did was give, give, and give. He gave till he had nothing more to give. When Jesus says to us, do this in memory of me, what he's saying is that we Christians, we who call ourselves disciples, we celebrate the Eucharist, but then the Eucharist needs to be the culmination, the highest point of our self-giving. How do we give ourselves? First of all, we give ourselves to God. Really, Jesus gave us body, soul, divinity, and we give back to God body, soul, humanity, all the entire self. To hold anything back from God is really contrary to the spirit of the Eucharist. So Jesus gives us body, soul, divinity. We give back body, soul, humanity. And secondly, Jesus gave his flesh for the life of the world, and so must his disciples. We must give ourselves for the life of the world. Whether it's the people we love or the whole wide world, our life must only bring life. Yes, our life must only bring life. If our life and actions make someone else's life more difficult than it is, if our life does harm, brings pain, takes life, creates destruction, if our life does not enhance our life and other people's lives, if our life is lived only for the self, then our celebration of the Eucharist is a lie. Then we are not doing this in memory of Jesus. Then our discipleship is our lie. Our Christianity is our lie. And so, what Jesus taught us, friends, we must do. And let's do this in memory of him. The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world.